Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Ann Collingham, and I'm here to discuss tonight genetic testing and addiction. Whoops. Oh, there we go. I'll just go ahead and skip to the overview. So basically, if you've been anywhere in the recent history, you've seen multitudes of advertisements there we go, on social media and television, advertising these take-home DNA kits. They're appealing to people because you can learn about your ancestry, as well as there's the plug you can learn about yourself and your predispositions for health reasons, say for food sensitivities, or in some cases, health issues such as addiction and other mental health issues. The problem with this is that uh, the status of where we're at when actually identifying uh, the genes associated with substance use disorders is not to the point where these tests will be giving a great significant amount of accuracy to the users. And that is kind of an issue. So where are we at in genetic research related to substance use disorders? Right now, the majority agree that genetic factors contribute to substance use disorder susceptibility. There's been tons of twin assessments, research tests, as well as family tests, where they can see there is a clear genetic uh, correspondence to addiction. They also agree, the majority of researchers agree, that substance use disorder is a complex disease. And to get this disease, it's a combination of things. It's multiple genes working together, environmental influences, and the big thing on the timing of when all these factors come together in the duration of the process of getting the addiction. Those three things are really what people agree to as being behind substance use disorder development. What researchers don't agree on is that what specific gene is involved with substance use disorder and the amount of influence that genes may have on substance use disorders. We'll see in the next slide of some issues they've run into. What was interesting was when I was reading the research is that it seems that the substance is agnostic. It could have been alcohol, nicotine, opioids. Uh, it didn't matter. These results that they're seeing in the studies are exactly the same. It's that genetic substance use disorder susceptibility is polygenic, meaning that those individual genes are too small to be observed, but we know they're there, but they must act together to produce an observable variation. So that was kind of interesting. So where is the gene? Uh, and what's interesting is that sometimes environmental factors may actually overcome genetic factors. So do we need to develop genetic testing? Some researchers are asking, can a detailed family history suffice instead of this genetic testing? And maybe what is the reason of why we can't find this gene? Is it because the human genome is so complex that we just can't figure it out? Or is it because of poor study design? Maybe that's to blame of why we can't find the gene. So in short, yeah, study design can affect the outcome of research, but it's still not the cause in this case. There's two types of analysis that are used mainly when researching genetics, and that's linkage analysis and association analysis. In linkage analysis, they use family genomes to locate where the disease is in relation to the genetic marker on the chromosome. So it's really useful. This type of analysis is really useful when a gene is heavily contributes to the disease development. And one of the articles that I read gave was that the BRCA1 mutation for breast cancer, that gene is very heavily contributes to that specific type of breast cancer. And so using linkage, it was a linkage research, they were able to find that specific disease on that chromosome. Now, association studies a group of the population. They aren't related, it's not required, but they identify traits associated with the disease that commonly occur throughout the population. So these types of assessments or analysis do well with analyzing polygenic diseases, or those that have multiple genes that contribute to the actual disease. And an example of how this was successfully used was in the ALDH2 gene variation discovery, which ALDH2 gene variation is commonly referred to as Asian flush, and I'll get more into that here in the next slide. But and one thing to remember to know is that linkage studies don't necessarily do well if against a disease that is a polygenic disease. They do better with those one singular or very few genes that are associated. But what is the biggest effect of what the problem is right now with all this research? Is the fact that on both linkage analysis and association analysis of most of the studies, almost majority of the studies, they can't replicate their original results when they have follow-on studies. So it's making it very difficult. So some researchers suggested maybe they need to take a different approach to researching the genetic susceptibility of, I'm just going to say SUDs, so I don't have to keep repeating that. Because SUDs are complex polygenic structures, it makes it difficult to identify the individual genes associated with the overarching disease. So the recommendation was maybe study the individual components of the disorder, something like the responses to the substance, responses to the alcohol, or personality traits. And so when they started doing this is where the ALDH2 gene analysis came in, and it actually worked. ALDH2 gene variation actually causes an insufficient amount of ALDH2 levels in the body. And ALDH2 is what is used to break down acetaldehyde. That is the toxic substance. So when you ingest alcohol, it's broken down into this toxic substance before the liver can create the ALDH2 to break that toxic substance down. So when they have this gene variation, they don't create enough of the ALDH2, and therefore that toxic substance remains in your body for longer periods of time. So the result is, if they have this variation with these decreased levels, they get a reaction commonly referred to as Asian flush. You'll see their face is very red, they may have heart palpitations, sweats, and it can be deadly in some cases. So having this gene variance actually has been correlated to a decreased alcohol dependency within Asian populations. So Asian populations are the ones where this variation is most predominant. It's very rare to find it in any other ethnicity groups. So what's interesting about this is there is a drug called disulfiram. I know I slaughtered that, I'm sorry. But that drug is used to help maintain sobriety in alcoholics. And what that drug does is it mimics the ALDH2 gene defect by blocking ALDH2 production. So that's kind of interesting. So looking at the individual components vice the whole disorder allowed the researchers to discover this gene variation, as well as verify that a drug that was being used achieves the same effect as this gene variation. So in overarching terms, research results are that most of the studies related to substance use disorder and other common human diseases where they are complex genome structures, the gene identification is inconclusive. They can't replicate the original findings, and if they are able to replicate findings, which is very rare, or very, it's not very often, they have modest predictive rates for risk. It's like they say it makes you only 1.2 to 1.5 percent more likely to achieve that disorder, vice if you didn't have that genetic variation. But these inconclusive results should not dissuade the pursuit of genetic testing. Genetic testing has more applications than finding predictive susceptibility. It may actually add with the selecting of the most appropriate treatment for the individual, similar to what they found in that previous study that I talked about. So tests for genetic predisposition and substance use disorders. Despite all the inconclusive research results, there have been tests that have been received that claim to be able to predict or find the genes that make people susceptible to addiction. Proof Biosciences and Innovative Medical Testing are some of those examples, and that came out around 2016 timeframe. And in both of these cases, genetic experts came out in defense to say these are not accurate tests and they are not doing what they claim. Ultimately, it was interesting. Prove Biosciences was investigated by the FBI in 2017, and they filed for bankruptcy because of their malpractices, basically. And in 2020, their vice president of marketing was found guilty in federal court of crimes against basically soliciting and bribing medical professionals to participate in their studies. There are other direct-to-consumer tests that are of concern too, such as 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, where they don't claim specifically that they can find the predictive gene, but they do make claims that are on the borderline in terms of what they actually study. So one of the researchers I found did in-depth study on these tests and found that what the tests are measuring are actually these things listed here. Only the risk of nicotine dependence to current smokers and screening for that ALDH2, the Asian flush variation, and the predicted response to naltrexone treatment. But when you look at their websites, they don't state that it's just for those minor things. It kind of makes it sound like it's bigger, like, oh, they're going to be able to find that gene to see if they're susceptible to alcoholism. So they must be playing within those lines there. So what are the implications to us as counselors and our future practices? Well, first, once the genetic research results become more consistent and they're actually able to find more of those discoveries of the genetics and how it works, testing and counseling practices may be beneficial. It may help us prevent disease and improve the health of our clients. Specifically, it can assist us in selecting appropriate pharmacological, behavioral, and psychological interventions. But this also can be utilized in a different way where it can help us bolster advocacy effects. As we know, mental health has a stigma related to it that medical diseases don't necessarily have. Well, when somebody hears that you have a genetic if you have a genetic mutation or something along those lines, they're more likely to gravitate towards a medical cause, not a mental health cause. So this may allow us to garner empathy and support for these disorders, these substance use disorders. So what that can also help us do is destigmatize substance use disorders, as well as possibly help increase resources allocated to the study and the treatment of these disorders. Now, there's also some concerns about test outcomes for right now, and in the future that we have to deal with. So I say right now because we have those consumer tests, those 23andMe's, those DNA kits that they can come out. So we might have to deal with these right now with current clients that we have. So we need to be looking out for a client, if they test positive for an above average risk of developing a substance use disorder, is unlikely to change their behavior. That's what they've found in the research. They've also found in a study about smokers is that when they learned they were genetically more susceptible to developing lung cancer, they weren't more likely to quit or succeed in their quitting than smokers who didn't have that genetic predisposition. It was just the same. And also, they found that clients may be less motivated to quit an existing substance use disorder if they discover they do not have a genetic susceptibility. So they may think that it's no big deal, so they'll just keep on using. And then also, clients with a low susceptibility may gain a false sense of security that they can't get a substance use disorder. So they may not be as cautious when they're using substances, and that may ultimately result in them developing a substance use disorder. So, what's important for us to remember is that, as we would with any other type of assessment or type of test, that we make sure our clients understand that the test does not show the complete story and they actually understand what the tests are showing them and the implications to their health. And really ultimately is making sure that we have open lines of communications with our clients at all times. So this was my little synopsis of uh, genetic research and testing and its applications to substance use disorders. I look forward to your questions.